Hello, and welcome to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. And today's stream, as you see on your screens now, Manufacturing Hate. Why were American liberals at the SPLC funding Nazis? This is the topic for today's stream. We're going to go into a great deal more detail for you on this story, which broke this week that we've just gone through. And it is an incredible story that relates to the very well known US 501c3 charity, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has reserves of millions. It's meant to be an anti racism organization. They've just been indicted by a federal grand jury for funding racists and organizing racist rallies through their funding. And those that have been named that they have funded include groups such as the KKK and other Nazi and neo-Nazi organizations. It is the cartoon for today's stream, therefore, is apt in describing how the Southern Poverty Law Center, as you can see there to the left of the screen in the cartoon, were taking bags full of donations. That's the cash bag there, going through the conveyor belt of the Southern Poverty Law Center, only to lead to churning out more and more racism. And that's why a bit of a sly dig there at Chomsky's title, Manufacturing Consent. We've called today's stream Manufacturing Hate. Why were American liberals at the SPLC funding Nazis? We're going to break down what exactly happened with this story over the course of this stream. We're going to provide the receipts for how the SPLC were funding racism and were, as a result, almost tripling the donations that they were receiving for funding it from the members of the public that they scared after the protests, the racist protests that they themselves funded. So we're going to go into some of the details of that with the receipts, but also break down for a bit more exactly what beyond the funding advantages the SPLC were playing out. And really, to summarize that, it comes down to funding both sides in order to control the dialectic, in order to be able to control and dictate the outcome. If you scare the public, to put it in layman's terms, sufficiently enough, then the public will demand more security. So they will demand from government more powers to keep them ostensibly safe from the racism that they fear. In other words, welcoming in with their own arms such government powers. So we're going to spend the rest of this stream on this topic. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the opening credits to break all of this down for you. You're listening to the Radical Majid Nawaz for the Warrior Creed live stream.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to the Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. And today's topic for you, as we just introduced, Manufacturing Hate. Why were American liberals at the Southern Poverty Law Center funding Nazis? And let's go to sharing our screen so we can begin with the top line story, exactly what's happened here. And that is the DOJ, led by the FBI, filing charges against the Southern Poverty Law Center. So on your screens right about now, you should be able to see an update of that from Kanekawa the Great online. They posted this as the events unfolded. It's a good summary for what happened. We're going to read it for you. Breaking: the Department of Justice charges the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, with wire fraud, false statements, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The SPLC secretly funneled $3 million in donor funds to violent racist extremist groups, including, and then they're listed here for you, the KKK, American Nazi Party, Aryan Nation, United Klans of America, Unite the Right, National Alliance, National Socialist Movement, Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club, and the American Front. To continue reading, To hide the payments, the Southern Poverty Law Center, or the SPLC, allegedly opened bank accounts under fictitious entities to conceal the source and control of donor funds. Per the indictment, an SPLC field source was a member of the online leadership chat group that planned the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, made racist postings under SPLC's supervision, and helped coordinate transportation to the event. Now, the rest of this quote simply shows screen grabs, quotes from FBI Director Kash Patel's press conference. So instead of reading those, we're just going to play the video of his press conference for you. But before we do, already from that top line summary, it's really important to understand exactly what you've just heard. And that is because the Southern Poverty Law Center stands accused of funding members who were in the leadership chat group that planned the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And if you remember, those of you who are avid followers of American current affairs, that was the famous or infamous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, the Tiki Torch rally, that was astroturfed around social media and on your press, mainstream corporate press, that is, as proof positive for a few things. One of them was the link between MAGA rhetoric and the rise of the so-called far right in American political culture. And the other was the link between Donald Trump's campaign in 2020, the election that was interfered with, and that we on Radical Media have never once backed down from arguing that it was interfered with. Not during the time it happened. Of course, this is all public record. You can go onto our social media and check the history there. Not from the time it actually unfolded live, all the way through the 2020 Biden presidency. We maintain the line that we maintain till today, that election was unduly and unfairly interfered with by globalists in order to keep President Trump from securing a second term, which, of course, he is now partially in or through in 2026. But that 2020 election campaign was interfered with, not least by social media banning and removing a sitting president from social media. Big tech all uniting in their decision to do so amid accusations that he was fueling hate online. And of course, the 2017 infamous Charlottesville Unite the Right Tiki Torch rally was astroturfed, and the video of which and images of which were astroturfed across your media as proof positive that all President Trump and the MAGA right do is incite the far right, and are directly therefore responsible for the rise of hatred and racism in our society. So it is incredibly important that it's now been revealed that the Southern Poverty Law Center has been indicted by a grand jury, mind you. It's not like in the United Kingdom where there's a Crown Prosecution Service, which, as the name states, isn't a grand jury. It's a prosecution service that serves the Crown, in other words, the King. In America, it's a grand jury that indicts organizations such as the SPLC on charges such as this. And so they're already there has been a level of public scrutiny as to whether or not they should have been indicted, and the public, in the form of a grand jury, have decided that they should be. The serious allegations that we're going to go into include the idea of scaring people in order to use their funds to fund racism, so that they give you more funds because they're even more scared of racism after you've used their money to fund the very racism they're scared of. That is a grossly immoral and unethical way to operate for a charity. And we're going to go through the excuse that they've used for operating in this way. But beyond that, if you bear with us through this stream, we need to explain the political agenda here and the political consequences beyond the funding that the SPLC, their actions led to. And that revolves around the 2017 Tiki Torch rally, the Biden presidency, and the desperate effort to paint President Trump as a candidate who will revive Nazism and the KKK in America, and therefore he must be kept out of his second term from 2020 onwards. That is the crucial element there that the SPLC, in doing what they have been indicted over doing, ended up being part of the wider conspiracy to interfere with the presidency in 2020 and therefore the presidential election. This is simply the tip of the iceberg. As massive, as huge as this story is, it relates, in fact, to the wider, even bigger story of the 2020 interfered with election campaign in the United States of America. And that's just yet another reason why this story is so important. And so with that introductory and summary, by the way, before we carry on from this point, it is important to remember, as we're about to show you media clips demonstrating that the Southern Poverty Law Center also have form in their funding of both sides. And in 2018, yours truly won a defamation case against them for $3.4 million because they suggested that I was an anti-Muslim extremist for challenging and exposing the way in which such lists and organizations that compile such lists operate. Clearly now, in hindsight, it is vindicating for the observer to see precisely who the SPLC are and precisely who radical media are. At the time, Quilliam, the counter-extremism organization that I was the founding chairman of, was the organization that they attempted to prevent being able to raise funds by listing me as an anti-Muslim extremist. We're going to show you updates on that as well. So all of that coming up in today's stream. You can see it's a huge topic and an incredibly important one. So let's go to, first of all, FBI Director Kash Patel's announcement of the indictment. Exactly what did he say when this announcement was made? It did indeed shock the world. So that should be on your screens about now, and we're just going to play it for you.
To announce what the general just told you, the Southern Poverty Law Center, in a massive sweeping indictment, has been charged with allegations of fraud and using the banking system to perpetrate that fraud. I just want to talk about a couple brief things here. The Southern Poverty Law Center themselves advertise to raise money to dismantle violent extremist groups for a period of at least a decade. They use their donor network to raise money to purportedly dismantle violent extremist groups. However, the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, used the money they raised from their donor network to actually pay the leadership of these very groups. I just want to say that again. They used the fraudulently raised money by lying to their donor network, thousands of Americans, to go ahead and actually pay the leadership of these supposed violent extremist groups. The groups, as the general laid out, include the Ku Klux Klan, the United Klans of America, Unite to Right, National Alliance, the National Socialist Movement, the Aryan Nation Motorcycle Club, and the National Socialist Party of America, and also the American Front. In at least one of these matters, our investigation revealed that funds were used to facilitate the commission of further state and federal offenses, totaling over $3 million. Furthermore, our investigation revealed that the Southern Poverty Law Center, on top of perpetuating this widespread, decade-long, multi-million-dollar fraud, conducted more criminal activity. They attempted to hide their criminal activity from our financial banking network. They set up shell companies and entities around America so that the financial institutions that we rely on as everyday Americans were deceived in believing that money was not coming from the Southern Poverty Law Center in the perpetration of this scheme and fraud, but rather fictitious entities they stood up to perpetuate this ongoing fraud. This is a serious and egregious violation of a group that purported to dismantle violent extremist groups, but in turn actually only fueled the hatred. This is an important case brought by President Trump's administration. We're thankful to the president for his leadership and funding of not just the FBI and DOJ, but his commitment to go out there and wipe out fraud and conspiracy and waste and abuse wherever it occurs, including the Southern Poverty Law Center. Even though this money was made to appear to be coming from legitimate people and legitimate entities, we at the FBI, with our great partners at the Department of Justice and in the state of Alabama, were able to comb through a decade worth of material, a scheme that took a decade to build, so that we were able to follow the money, because money never lies, and they got caught. As the Attorney General said, these charges are varying, they are widespread and wide-ranging, and this investigation is very much ongoing. Today, we're here to announce the charges of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and this investigation and the individuals who are responsible will be brought to justice. Thank you, General.
Now, the main thing from that all is to remember that the FBI Director Kash Patel just announced that this was a decade in the making. That means that the Southern Poverty Law Center has been doing this, engaging in this kind of behavior for quite some time, an incredibly long amount of time, and therefore has had time with the millions that they've raised to have a serious and genuine impact on American culture. So anybody who has even slightly sensed that there has been an increase in identitarianism, in allegations of hate speech, in clamping down on free speech, in mutual mistrust and fear of rising extremism, now needs at this stage to understand that for 10 years, it appears as if one of the wealthiest charities on the planet in the United States of America has been funding both sides of that hate. To what end? Well, to make profit, as we're going to demonstrate, but also for specific ideological political ends that we're going to use this stream to go into as well. But it's therefore, with that in mind, it's an incredibly serious allegation. And that's why the current meme on your screens now that we're showing you is a fair, we think a fair and a light-hearted way of summarizing exactly what the SPLC appear to have been up to. And that is on your screens now. The people employed, it's a Simpsons meme, the people employed to get rid of a problem will always try to preserve that problem. You should be able to see that on your screens now. We felt that's a quite an apt summary of the situation that we find ourselves in. And that is indeed because, of course, if the SPLC was profiting from manufacturing hate or funding hate, then they stood every reason to continue to do so. Now, we will, in the written version of this stream in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow, provide all these links with all these receipts, a link to the original grand jury indictment from the FBI's own page, from the DOJ's own page. All of that will be in the written Radical Dispatch of this stream tomorrow. We encourage all listeners and viewers to go to majidnawaz.substack.com, find Radical Media, that's majidnawaz.substack.com, and on there, premium subscribers will gain access to the full Radical Dispatch, including all the paywalled content and the paywalled podcast version of this stream as well. Now, we mentioned at the beginning that the SPLC has form in doing this. You heard there from FBI Director Kash Patel that this investigation into them has been ongoing for over a decade. We know this behavior that they've been engaged in has been going on for longer than a decade. But nearly a decade ago, there was a flash in the pan and a warning to the public about the way in which the SPLC behaves. And that is in particular when it comes to their hate lists, because they, as we said, they listed yours truly and others on a hate list that they compiled that was called a field guide to extremists. And of course, I then had to take legal action, or we had to take legal action, a group of us at Quilliam, and in the end, it resulted in a victory. So just as a background to that, we've got up here a post, well, who remembers when the Southern Poverty Law Center labeled me as an anti-Muslim extremist? They thought they were untouchable. We had to sue them to take a clean $3.4 million in damages from them. Now it seems that all along, they were funding actual anti-Muslim extremists. So here is the interview. It was on, as you can see on your screens from the date, it was on GB News America with Beverly Turner, the Late Show live on Thursday, 23rd of April, the second night the story broke. And we're going to play this for you. And keep in mind, this is what Bev Turner plays here is a segment from the full interview that will eventually end up on GB News Originals. But let's take a listen to this.
Right, moving on. Last night, we brought you the story of the influential Southern Poverty Law Center, right? This is bizarre. It is a powerful non-profit organisation that tracks what it calls hate groups across America, publishing a controversial hate map that's often cited, here we go, by media, politicians and even law enforcement. These are the people apparently generating hate. You can see those dots on the map. Well, yesterday, the Department of Justice here indicted the group on federal fraud charges. It's like charging them in the UK. It's a slightly different system. A jury does it here and the CPS does it in the UK. But it's alleging that it paid informants to infiltrate organisations without properly disclosing that to donors. It follows accusations of them labelling mainstream conservative organisations as extremist and smearing political opponents. Now, in 2018, one of the people they smeared was British political activist and commentator Majid Nawaz. Now, he sued the organisation at the time and he won $3.4 million in compensation. When I saw this story, I thought it was strange that they paid him off, but they didn't take it to court. And now he's got a theory as to why that might be. Have a look at this exclusive interview.
It was 2018. The SPLC had 2 years prior listed me, a Muslim, who was simply against extremism from within the Muslim community. I call it Islamist extremism, not Islam, my faith. I clarify this because the Southern Poverty Law Centre listed me as being an anti-Muslim extremist. And Bev, it's important for your viewers to know that when they do this, their purpose is to destroy the reputation of the targeted individual. It is to enable banks, federal agencies, and other institutions that subscribe to such lists and take this advice seriously to shut down bank accounts, to deny visas, to prohibit travel. All of that is done off the back of the hate lists that the SPLC compiles. So when they named me as an anti-Muslim extremist, meanwhile I'm a Muslim, of course its intention was to destroy my life. It did have a huge impact on our ability to raise funds. At the time I was the founding chairman of Quilliam, a counter-extremism organization. We had a 501c3 registered in the US as a charity, and we had to take them to court, Bev, and alongside Megan Mayer, who at the time was with Claire Locke, a specialist defamation law firm, but Megan is now since with her own law firm, Megan Watkins Phillips Push. We raised a case. I had raised some cash for it, and we also had a private donor that didn't want his name to be mentioned in public, but we managed to raise the cash, raise the case, and in the end, in 2018, we were the first and only successful case to win against the Southern Poverty Law Centre, and they had to pay $3.4 million, issue a public apology, remove my name from the list, and of course the rest is history. Fast forward to now, and we see really what they're all about.
So that's a clip from the interview with Majid Nawaz. You can see the long version of that on GB News' originals page on YouTube, and it is worth watching. The bit I don't think we saw there was Majid's theory being, Stephen, with the passage of time, they didn't take it to court because they knew that in the discovery process some of this might have come out, suggesting that they could have been doing this all those years ago.
Absolutely, and the DOJ investigation.
Now, you just heard prior to watching that video on GB News America, The Late Show with Bev Turner, that the FBI Director Kash Patel indeed said that this investigation had been going on for 10 years. My case against the SPLC was in 2018. That's only roughly 8 years ago. And therefore, the case would have entered into a period of time in which this investigation into them funding both sides, including the KKK, was active. And so the theory that the SPLC paid off $3.4 million in an attempt to shut that case down and in order to prevent disclosure, because disclosure would have revealed all of these other problems that they were being investigated for. That theory is quite a strong theory because it falls within the 10-year framework that Kash Patel identified as the length of this investigation. And so the Southern Poverty Law Centre, of course, wanted to shut our case down and therefore offered the money. But we were the first and only successful case. We got a video apology, a written apology, and damages, $3.375 million. And they removed the entire hate list that we were upset about, including all the other names that they'd included on there as well. But that really should have been an early warning sign for how the SPLC were behaving. Now, it isn't just reformer Muslims that the SPLC had come after, but also they'd come after Catholics as well. You can see that on your screens now from the House Judiciary GOP. And that names, it says, never forget, the SPLC and the Biden DOJ worked hand in glove with each other. They had regular meetings and targeted conservative groups and churches. The Biden DOJ even called the SPLC in an effort to target pro-life Catholics. It was all fraud. That's why we've investigated them for years. Here's our memo from 2023. Thank you, Acting AG Blanche and Director Patel, for delivering justice. And there is the 2023 memo as published by the House GOP. We, in tomorrow's dispatch, will, of course, link all of that as well. We'll link the original. We'll provide you, as you can see there, the full PDF in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch 2. But the really point of mentioning all this is that the SPLC was seeking to turn individuals that were particularly concerned with traditionalism, acting as people that valued their faith and tradition and heritage within the context of a modern democratic society. But because they valued their faith and their tradition and their heritage, they were also against people that would exploit that faith and tradition, such as extremists, in order to undermine the faith and tradition. The SPLC decided to list all of those people that were doing that hard work, whether they were Catholic or, in my case, Muslim, within our faith tradition communities. By doing so, they would undermine those genuine voices while, of course, funding the extremists that they were, scare the public, and the public would demand for harsher clampdown. And in the end, all we get was a harsher, stronger, and more illiberal state over time. The war on terror didn't help. All of this context is, of course, relevant, and we find ourselves in the technocratic situation of today. Is it any wonder if they were funding both sides? Now, to get to the excuse that the SPLC made, it's important to tell you what they're saying in response, but also to uncategorically refute and challenge that narrative, because it is so obviously false. And you'll see why as soon as we show you this. But of course, it is to be expected that the liberal American corporate press stood up to the defense of the SPLC with the feeble excuse, as USA Today's is on your screens now. And you can see there, you should be able to see USA Today have said the Southern Poverty Law Center was indicted for paying sources to infiltrate hate groups, a tactic federal agencies have used for decades. Well, that may be that federal agencies have used that tactic, which, by the way, doesn't make it right. But even then, here is our immediate response to that on your screens. We posted this as it unfolded. The SPLC's defense here is that as a third sector charity, is it their defense that they had arrogated to themselves investigative powers of a federal agency? In other words, are they claiming that because federal agencies have these powers, that they are, instead of being a charity, they are analogous to federal agencies and intelligence agencies? It is an absurd defense. Nevertheless, one that has been advocated by former U.S. Senator and now candidate for governor of Alabama, Doug Jones, who said here on your screens, charging the Southern Poverty Law Center with a federal crime for paying informants to help dismantle hate groups is an outrageous weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. As someone who's been a prosecutor and has taken on the clan, I can tell you that the use of paid informants is a common tactic used to dismantle drug cartels, the mob, and extremist groups on both the right and the left. It is clear that all civil rights organizations are in the crosshairs of this administration, and that, folks, puts everyone at risk. Doug Jones, here he is on video saying that, and then we're going to come to our response to that in just a moment.
The indictment that was returned against the Southern Poverty Law Center is just simply outrageous. This is not the pursuit of justice. This is pure political retribution. This is a Trump administration going after anyone who might oppose them, not just as a tax-exempt organization, but just seeking criminal charges against an organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, that has been around for 55 years and done remarkable work, seeking justice on behalf of individuals and communities who cannot seek that justice themselves, that do not have that resources. The Southern Poverty Law Center has been there consistently with those voices, with the legal arms. Big example, back in 1981, a lynching that occurred in Mobile, Alabama. Michael Donald was lynched, and it was the Southern Poverty Law Center who represented that family, got not just justice for Michael Donald and his family, but helped dismantle the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama and nationwide. And I got to tell you, I've looked at this indictment. It is absolutely ridiculous to think that they were raising money in a fraudulent way simply because they did not disclose publicly all of the tactics they were using in trying to get and take down and dismantle these agencies. The tactics they are accused of doing in paying informants, including some people, those are tactics used by law enforcement every day. I mean, I'm a former prosecutor, 2 stints with the Department of Justice. That's how you take down hate groups. That's how you take down extremist organizations. Hell, it's how you take down drug cartels, for goodness sake. That's what they do. And I know firsthand that the Southern Poverty Law Center in the years past have given this information and shared this information with local law enforcement and the FBI. They have used the information to help take down these groups. So this is crazy. This is another example of a weaponization that they are taking to all new levels. And everyone in this state and folks across the country should be alarmed at what they're seeing going on with this Department of Justice and how they are going after political enemies and those who simply oppose this president. It is not the way we do things, and it's certainly never the way the Department of Justice should operate.
So, as you hear there, the attempts to scare the public haven't ceased. It's a inverted world, as is clear from the SPLC originally funding both sides. The inversion prevails, and there, the former senator and now candidate for governor, Doug Jones, that's candidate for governor in Alabama in 2026, has decided to continue scaring the public by suggesting that instead of what this really is, a revelation of method, a look behind the curtain of how the intelligence agencies and these certain anti-racism or certain left-wing charities are hand in glove. Instead of understanding this as a look behind the curtain, the candidate for governor of Alabama is instead attempting to continue the deception by continuing to scare the public by using an inverted framework and suggesting that this is the politicization of justice to go after them. The politicization of justice was, in fact, what the SPLC were doing by funding both sides of hate and working hand in glove with the intelligence agencies and the government departments and government agencies, while claiming that they were, in fact, a charity and concealing that from donors. They are not a federal agency. So what Doug Jones has said there doesn't stand up to scrutiny. They are a charity. A charity is not only obliged to disclose to donors whether or not they're behaving in this manner, but in addition, a charity doesn't have the legal immunities and the legal powers to infiltrate extremist and illegal, potentially, organizations for the purposes of spying on them to bring cases. That is not the job of a charity. That is the job of law enforcement. So the answer there doesn't stack up. And that was noticed by many online. We're just going to read you a particular reaction into that so that you can see exactly how people are remaining incredulous at the fact that this story was even being defended in that way. There's Kyle Becker on his social page saying the SPLC wasn't paying for the infiltration of hate groups, not including Antifa, by the way. It was supervising the posting of racist hate messages and helping with the transport of agitators who provoke riots. We all can read the grand jury indictment, which isn't based on opinion, but facts. By the way, since you're all going with this idiotic fabricated narrative, if SPLC is a non-profit group, then they should just have staff members who are on salary infiltrating these groups. You hire them, put them on your books, and you don't conceal it from regulators or from donors. But the SPLC didn't, because it's not a law enforcement agency, unlike the FBI. The SPLC helped provoke the Charlottesville riot with paid agitators and then reap the financial windfall. And compromised Democrats and corporate allies are silent about the SPLC helping to organize events using the KKK, Aryan Nation, and Unite the Right, because the only thing that Democrats have to offer the American people are lies. Now, clearly, this has turned into a party political point, and that's not least because, unfortunately, the Democrats are party political. The Democrats did make this party political by being involved. It was the SPLC posing as a charity, allegedly working with government departments to do this work, while posing as a charity, and then, as we're going to demonstrate, coordinating these actions with the Democratic Party, all leading up to the 2020 election. So, of course, it's partisan. Again, unlike the inversion that's being attempted by certain quarters, it was the SPLC that made it partisan, just like it was the SPLC that politicized justice, not, in fact, the FBI that raided them for politicizing justice. The inversions here are important to beware of. So, again, we're going to show you how the New York Times recognized the correct issue here and stuck with the correct understanding or framing of this. And that is, as commented on by one user here, Hans Manke. He says, kudos to the New York Post. Did we say New York Times? Sorry. Kudos to the New York Post for being the only major outlet to get this right. The SPLC were paying the leaders. By definition, leaders cannot be informants. They run the operation. It's like paying the leader of Auschwitz to inform on who is carrying out the gassings instead of paying him to stop the gassings. It is perhaps the most grotesque, cynical, and pernicious racket ever devised. Of course, plenty of groups extract money from taxpayers and well-meaning donors of problems they inflate. But this is far worse because it breeds real hatred and manufactures real racial division to keep the grift alive. And here is the New York Post making it very clear where they stand. And of course, the framing here we're saying is the correct framing. New York Post said 8 hate group leaders, including KKK, Imperial Wizard, and neo-Nazi, got millions from SPLC as part of informant scheme, DOJ says. Read today's cover here. And there you can see it, hoodwink. Anti-hate group SPLC gave $3 million to racists they claim to fight. And again, in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, we'll provide all these details of all the names here, of all the leaders that they have, that the SPLC funded. It's all in what's on your screens now in that New York Post column article. And just to give you one sample of what's written there, you can see here. Let's pick a figure. In total, SPLC paid the informant $270,000 between 2015 and 2023. It's a significant amount of money, and that was somebody that ended up being involved in the Charlottesville rally. So you can see how that would impact culture negatively and therefore impact the political outcome. Here is a graphic. You can see there from the New York Post, more than $3 million in funds, $1 million to National Alliance affiliate, $300,000 to Aryan Nations affiliate, $270,000 to Unite the Right member, and $140,000 to former National Alliance chairman. This is all from the New York Post. Tomorrow's Radical Dispatch will publish all of this with the receipts and all the hyperlinks for you to look into it for yourselves. But suffice to say, for the purpose of this stream, that there was indeed manufacturing of hate. American liberals were funding Nazism and racism in order to raise more money to fight Nazism and racism. It is such an absurd story, reminiscent of the scene in the comedy, the movie Four Lions, a dark comedy about terrorism. When if anyone's seen that movie, it's quite a funny moment when the ginger convert basically suggests among the group that is the comedic terrorist cell that the best idea would be to blow up a mosque. Remember, these are people that are meant to be Muslims. Blow up a mosque so as to frame non-Muslims for doing so that the Muslims attack the non-Muslims, and therefore you have your jihad. This is the reality of the story that we're addressing is stranger than that example from fiction. This is quite literally what we're saying the SPLC appears because of this indictment to have been involved in. And as a result, you can see that the graphic we're putting up on your screens now is in fact no exaggeration, considering what it is that it's just been revealed that the SPLC have been involved in. Have a look at this graphic. This describes a cartoon at the top of a hooded figure with a tiki torch chasing a petrified woman, and then some text in the middle. If you can see that text. It's a man saying stop the far right, a brown man, in fact, saying stop the far right. And then, surprise, surprise, it's the very same brown man who said stop the far right that is holding the hand puppet of the tiki torch bearing KKK hooded figure. And he is revealed to be wearing an SPLC t-shirt. That is really appropriate to describe the reality of what in reality has actually happened. It is absurd to think of it, but it's the indictment and what it contains. This is purportedly a photo of the team members of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so when you look at that photo and look at this cartoon of them pretending to be the KKK while scaring a lady into believing that racism is real, of course, you can see the point being made. Now, at this stage, it of course, behooves us to say that racism is real. Of course, there is racism. Of course, there is violent racism. I, as a teenager growing up in Essex, had to deal with the consequences of some very severe, violent neo-Nazi racism. Of course, racism is real. That's not the point. It's not the point to deny any of these things. Islamist extremism is real. Its violent manifestation, jihadist terrorism, is real. Neo-Nazi racism and white supremacism is real. Hindutva supremacy in India is real. All of these forms of hate, far left extremism, communism, these are all real problems. That's not the issue here for the purposes of this stream. Racism is real. The issue we're talking about is that the SPLC funded that real racism. That's the issue. So let's not get confused. We're not saying there's no such thing as racism. We're saying the SPLC funded the racism that you're complaining about. And of course, by funding it, ballooned it, inflated its size, magnified the fear that it created, because they were the ones adding fuel to that real fire. So of course, the fire grew because of the fuel that they added. That is the point that we're making here in this stream. And as for motive, and why they may be doing this, we said we wanted to bring you two. One was directly because it raises more money. And so that's on your screens now. We're going to show you that. These are some of the figures that came out around the funding that they managed to raise, in particular after the Charlottesville infamous Tiki Torch protest that they funded. So you can see here, we've written the more hate they funded, the more money the SPLC Center made. Andrew Colvett posts this particular graphic on his socials. The SPLC revenue before Charlottesville was $51 million, $871,438. And the SPLC revenue after Charlottesville was $133 million, $463,398. And the SPLC paid $270,000 to a Unite the Right rally leader in order to make that triple the profit there. So what you can see here is that for a $270,000 investment, they managed to nearly triple their revenue. And that is really why this particular graphic, again, is appropriate to show you here. The Southern Poverty Law Center stands for SPLC, scaring people for loads of cash. That's really what they were doing. It is unreal. It is unreal just to think of it, that a 70 to fund the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, the Tiki Torch rally, by the sum of $270,000, they were able to triple the donations that came to them. And therefore, they sufficiently scared their donors enough that they tripled their funds, scaring people into lending their cash. Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC. It was a grift. Now, yes, it didn't start as a grift. Of course, they were in the bad old days of actual racism in the United States of America in the South. They were renowned for doing some good work. But very sooner or later, and sort of soon after that, they managed to become hijacked and weaponized by certain agencies that were seeking to politicize them for the sake of influencing the political outcome and making a bit of cash in the meanwhile. And unfortunately, it's not something that was very recent, but it's been going on for a while. And to show you what exactly we mean by that, you can see this post on your screen now. And it's important to keep this in mind. And we'll just read it for you. But it does point to an earlier start date for some of these shenanigans. So somebody calling themselves Colonel Towner Watkins on socials says, just when you thought you'd seen it all. The U.S. Department of Justice released FBI documents indicating that the Southern Poverty Law Center engaged in undercover surveillance of Oklahoma militia groups in 1995, before and after the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building. The local FBI team, which should have obtained a warrant to dispatch real FBI agents, criminally conspired with SPLC agents to get around Attorney General Janet Reno's legal limitations on domestic spying. Because the conspiracy was criminal, the espionage was illegal. Embedded in the Oklahoma militia group was a German tied to their Gladio program who was allowed to leave the country. He was training the militia. So as you can see here, an allegation going all the way back to the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, demonstrating that the idea of manufacturing hate, which is the title for today's stream, the idea of using anti-racist groups and anti-hate groups to fund directly the hate that they're complaining about. In other words, manufacturing the hate so that they can provide a pretext for a harsher and harsher security response, otherwise known in the terrorism world as funding false flags, so that you can provide a pretext for the reaction that you need, problem, reaction, solution. That this has been going on for a long time. And the SPLC case is a live example of the very idea of the allegation made that these groups, the globalists, are funding both sides in order to bring about their securitized state. That's how they use perma wars abroad. And it's what they do at home by funding racism while being anti-racist. It's the same principle as funding the perma wars abroad. And that brings us to the next point, which is the political or ideological angle. And you can see on your screens now, that is in fact the next section of the written radical dispatch that we'll be providing for all of our subscribers tomorrow. Go to radical media on majidnawaz.substack.com. But you should be able to see now a subheading from that radical dispatch. They fund both sides to control the outcome. And that's really the point that we're making. What we're going to do for this part of the stream is try and read a bit of this long thread by Data Republican, because it's actually small r Republican, that is, because it's actually very good. And it really makes the point that we are trying to make in a thread form, and we'll just read it for you. Thread: how the Charlottesville rally and SPLC birthed an entire $1 billion plus quote unquote democracy ecosystem. 11 federal counts, wire fraud, money laundering conspiracy. But here's what the SPLC headlines are missing. The indictment describes a paid informant in the leadership chat that planned Unite the Right. That informant helped coordinate transportation to the rally at SPLC's direction. There is one publicly identified organizer whose documented role was transportation coordinator. His Discord posts about running over protesters were made 26 days before Heather Heyer was killed by a car. The indictment says postings were made under the supervision of the SPLC. Charlottesville then became the founding event for a billion-dollar political machine. SPLC installed itself as that machine's definitional gatekeeper. I report, you draw your own conclusion. So this is Small R Republican, Data Republican on socials, posting on April 2022, linking it to the SPLC's ideological subversion by funding both sides. And that's the point really we're making. You see here some of the receipts are posted from the documents there. F-37 was a member of the online leadership chat group that planned the 2017 Unite the Right rally event in Charlottesville. The text of it is posted there in the receipts. We'll publish all of this for you in tomorrow's dispatch. But to continue reading from Data Republican, the point here is this one. Now, here's why this matters beyond the fraud charges. Charlottesville became the single most consequential founding event in modern American political infrastructure. Every one of these organizations says in their own words that they exist or were transformed because of August the 12th, 2017, which was Charlottesville and the infamous Unite the Right Tiki Torch rally. That includes the Stand Together Network by the Kochs, who report that August 12th, 2017 was a tipping point. It includes, according to Data Republican, Kochs, Soros, Ford, ADL, all in one coalition because of Charlottesville. To continue reading, ADL founded Communities Overcoming Extremism, the After Charlottesville Project, literally named after the event. To continue reading, all of that traces back to one event. Then in September 2022, Biden held the United We Stand Summit. Merrick Garland launched the United Against Hate the same day. That's Attorney General Merrick Garland. 3 days before the summit, okay, this is the key point here. 3 days before the summit, the SPLC wrote a letter to Susan Rice asking to define the terms and goals of our continued collaboration. In other words, the SPLC writing to the Democrats to define the terms and goals of our continued collaboration during the Biden presidency. And that is the point of the ideological subversion. Why they were doing it was to steer the policy outcomes. Data Republican's final post in the thread that we've quoted here, and the ecosystem listened. National Civic League webinar, Mapping America's Healthy Democracy Ecosystem. Over 10,000 organizations cataloged. An audience member asks how they decide who gets excluded. Listen to the answer. Spoiler, it's SPLC. And we'll just play you a clip from that webinar.
That's an excellent question. I think we have tried to match the kind of definitions of hate speech that are currently prominently used by the organizations that track that, the Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU. So we're aligning our decisions with what are generally accepted standards about hate speech.
Now, what we've just read to you from that Small R Data Republican thread and the webinar clip we've just played you is making a deeper point that we hope by now is clear. That it wasn't just about profit. The Southern Poverty Law Center, by funding both sides, was seeking to control the dialectic. What's the dialectic? Problem, reaction, solution. If you've got a problem, which is rising insecurity in society due to a civil war narrative, the public starts demanding the solution, which is make us feel safer. And so that's the reaction of the public. The solution that comes in to make them feel safer is a securitized state. You end up with more and more power going to the state. In other words, you end up demanding the very technocracy that enslaves you because you're scared. That is how the dialectic works. Problem, reaction, solution. If you are controlling that dialectic, if you're controlling the problem where it's seated, you're able to manipulate the people that react, and therefore you're able to provide the solution. What you're doing is controlling the outcome. And of course, it was the Democrats who were in power working with the Southern Poverty Law Center to control that outcome, as you just heard. The Unite the Right Tiki Torch rally in Charlottesville that the SPLC funded was used to scare and nudge the public into backing Biden over Trump, interfering in the 2020 election, and then once Biden was president, attempting to use his presidency to brand everybody else as hateful. Who remembers when they tried to call those skeptical of COVID mandates as hate-filled anti-science conspiracy theorists and wanted to label them under the Biden presidency as domestic terrorists? Radical media was covering it at the time. If you go back to majidnawaz.substack.com, Go to Radical Media, look up domestic terrorists Biden, and you'll see all the receipts where the president of Biden sought to use the label domestic terrorists to go after his political opponents. And those political opponents were given to him by lists that were compiled by groups such as the SPLC. And that's why it's so important that they listed me and why we defeated them in 2018 and force them to take down that list. Because as we said in that clip for GB News America, what they are seeking to do by compiling such lists is to create targeted individuals. Why? To destroy the lives of those targeted individuals by denying them visas, by denying them bank accounts, by making it impossible for them to live and speak, by calling them hateful, shutting them down. In other words, in modern 2026 parlance, cancelling them. And by cancelling them, what they're really doing is taking out their political opponents, such as how they tried to cancel President Trump from social media. All of these terrifying events happened, including the COVID mandates and their attempts to cancel those who spoke out against them. All of that happened while Biden was president after being elected in 2020. And it was the SPLC and their funding of the Charlottesville rally and other Unite the Right and other Nazi groups that allowed them to scare the electorate into believing that a second Trump term would in fact only lead to the rise of Nazism, the very Nazism they were funding. That is the ideologically subservient, subversiveness that the SPLC were engaged in, and it's why it's important to understand it in those terms, in the terms that we have just described. So to go back to concluding on that point there, and what data Republicans, small r Republicans said there, the org that defined who was a hate group asked the White House to make that role permanent. The org that set the standards for the entire ecosystem adopted is now charged with paying the people it was tracking. The organization whose informant was allegedly in the planning chat for the event that justified building the machine raised $132 million in the fiscal year that included Charlottesville. We need to ask, if the organization at the center of America's entire post-Charlottesville democracy infrastructure had a supervised informant, or worse, agent provocateur, inside the event that justified building that infrastructure, what does that make the infrastructure? And of course, we've answered that for you. The whole point of the infrastructure was to control, surveil, enslave the very people that were demanding that infrastructure to keep them safe. That is how controlling the dialectic works. Problem, reaction, solution. You scare the public enough that they start demanding, by reaction, they start demanding the very tyranny that is designed in advance, ahead of time, to manipulate them into demanding, so that they can be then controlled and further scared. It is a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. It happened during COVID. It happened during Antifa. It happened during BLM. It happened with the SPLC. It's been happening for a very long time. With the SPLC's case, we can go back as far as Oklahoma City to see how this manipulation has been going on. Of course, throughout the war on terror, it would have happened as well. In foreign policy terms, it comes down to funding perma wars on both sides by globalists. And in domestic political terms, it comes down to funding all sides of extremist political rhetoric so that the public remains in a permanent state of fear. This SPLC case is a critical and vivid example of how the funding the both sides works, of how controlling the dialectic to control the outcome works. And of course, who's behind the surveillance state or the further securitization of the state? Well, it goes without saying that that all comes back down to Palantir, the company that is using AI to do things such as target in conflict zones for military targeting, and in domestically to organizations such as ICE to go after suspects that they believe were illegal migrants. Of course, it all resulted in deaths in protests, and it led to President Trump calling the ICE raids off. But all of the securitization is used in all of these cases because of the fear that all of these narratives create. Its purpose is to, in the end, lead to people demanding their own tyranny. Now, it wasn't just me that the SPLC listed in 2018 when we defeated them, but it was others as well. And we're going to show you that now, because, of course, there were others that were targeted as targeted individuals. It's reported in Free Press that Ayan Hirsi Ali has written a column explaining all of this. You can see the headline now from Free Press on the 24th of April. Ayan Hirsi Ali, the SPLC targeted me. Now its reckoning has come. There's a photo of Ayan, and we're just going to read a key section of this for you. That's on your screens now. It says, I was placed on an SPLC blacklist in October 2016. The document was called a journalist manual, field guide to anti-Muslim extremists. My name appeared beside Majid Nawaz, a reformed radical who ran a counter-extremism organization, and an array of figures also dedicated to combating Islamism and anti-Semitism, such as David Horowitz and Daniel Pipes. The list handed journalists a ready-made roster of 15 people whose views were to be seen as toxic, but to call it a mere reference guide is to understate what it was. Here's the important part, folks, because this is the climate into which that list was published by the SPLC. It was published at the peak of a jihadist campaign of terror against the West. The ISIS caliphate still held territory across Syria and Iraq. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, was issuing hit lists of writers and cartoonists in its English language magazine. In January 2015, two of AQAP's followers walked into the offices of the magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris and murdered 12 people. Some of them cartoonists whose offense was drawing. 10 months later, a coordinated ISIS cell killed 130 at Paris's Bataclan Theatre and the cafes around it. Terror attacks in Brussels, Nice, Berlin, and Manchester soon followed. This was the climate in which the SPLC chose to publish the names, faces, and affiliations of 15 people it accused of anti-Muslim extremism. And that is the point, folks, there, that the climate that they published this list in, it's easy today to forget, was a climate of absolute terror and fear. Ayan continues, the list endangered everyone it named. I know the threat of Islamist violence all too well, she says. In 2004, a jihadist named Mohammed Bayouri murdered my friend and collaborator Theo van Gogh on an Amsterdam street. Of course, I remember all of this unfolding, being listed with her on this same list at the time it happened. Bayouri shot him, cut his throat, and pinned a 5-page letter to his chest with a knife. The letter was a fatwa against me. This is Ayan speaking. I have lived under armed protection for more than 2 decades because men with weapons and conviction want me dead for apostasy, for writing about Islamist-driven anti-Semitism and the subversive actions of the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist groups in the West, for drawing attention to practices such as honor killings and FGM, for arguing that Muslim women deserve the same protections under the law as other women. So to conclude, Ayan says in that article, Nawaz sued the group and won. In June 2018, the SPLC settled for $3.4 million and issued a written apology. The field guide vanished from its website. No apology was ever extended to me, this is Ayan, or others who were unfairly placed on that list. All of these receipts will be published in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, including the names from records from the time of those SPLC staff that engaged in this witch hunt to undermine genuine anti-racism, anti-tyranny activists while funding the actual racists. And in tomorrow's dispatch, we will name such SPLC positions or activists at the time, such as Heidi Byrick, who was heavily involved in personally me, for which the SPLC had to apologize. We will also publish our original legal demand letter that Ayan just referred to. We sued them and won because we raised a case with a boutique American law firm called, at the time, was Clear Lock that we used. And since then, of course, Megan Mayer has gone on to form her own law firm. That was one of the key lawyers we were working with at Clare Lock. But of course, the founders, Clare and Locke, are still there. Thomas Clare and Elizabeth Locke, they're still at Clare Lock, and we were in touch with them too. Now, we're very grateful to all of them at Clare Lock and to Megan Mayer for the work that they did. There's our original demand letter to the SPLC, and you can see there the date, April the 18th, 2018. All of that text there. We've got the full PDF in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch that we'll publish for you, so you can read that if you're interested and see exactly how the SPLC basically hounded anti-Muslim extremists while actually funding the anti-Muslim extremists that they were in the KKK, while accusing others of being anti-Muslim extremists. Now, the last point here is the point that we want to raise about the fact that it shouldn't stop here, that there are other wider implications that this scandal reveals. And that is a point, in fact, made directly by Ayaan Hirsi Ali on her social media feed that we want to read for you now. This is her saying, you should see this on your screens, there is no reason to assume the deception stopped at the SPLC's doors. Every major civic institution that traded its founding mission for the prestige of enforcing multiculturalist orthodoxy deserves the same scrutiny, the same audit, and, when warranted, the same indictment. That is, of course, true. We endorse that view that every major civic institution that it behaved in this way should be subjected to the same scrutiny. The last thing we'll say on this is there is, in fact, a UK version of the SPLC, and that is on your screens now. Our own post reminding Nick Lowles of Hope Not Hate in the UK. We are coming. And that's from a 2015 Breitbart article by Raheem Kassam, headlined "Foreign-Funded Hard Left, Hope Not Hate releases counter-jihad report slamming Muslim moderates." And to quote from that report, from the Breitbart article on that report, Mrs. Saraswati, who wears a hijab and considers herself a devout practicing reformist Muslim, was targeted due to her links to anti-Sharia campaigners. Her inclusion in the report drew ire from other reformist Muslims, including Majid Nawaz of the Quilliam Foundation, who took to Twitter to air his disgust. So this is a UK group, Hope Not Hate, that did exactly the same thing as the SPLC, as reported by Breitbart's Raheem Kassam in 2015. And the key point to read, again, we'll post all these receipts for you tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch. But the key point to understand from that is that the UK report also listed some Muslims, including a hijabi Muslim woman, as being anti-Muslim extremists simply because they were speaking out against Islamist extremism. Islamism meaning the desire to impose one version of Islam over all of society. So the SPLC in the US and Hope Not Hate in the United Kingdom were seeking to undermine anti-Islamist or anti-theocracy Muslims by character assassinating them, by making them targeted individuals on these lists so that even federal agencies and government departments would start cancelling them and making it difficult for them to travel or open bank accounts. So that's how they were treating those Muslims who were seeking to challenge theocracy within our own community context. Meanwhile, they were funding the actual extremists who hated Muslims. Why would that be? Well, as we've said, to be able to fund the hate, to scare the public into controlling the outcome and further securitizing the state. And for all of that to work, they needed to undermine the actual genuine voices that were seeking to challenge that hate and expose it. It couldn't be clearer. That's what the SPLC has been engaged in. That's what they've been indicted over by a grand jury. Tomorrow's Radical Dispatch will bring you all those receipts in written form with the hyperlinks, with the PDFs, with the full letters, all of that published there for you that we've touched on today. But for now, that's all we've got time for today. We will say that GB News clip that you saw, the one the interview with me for GB News America with Bev Turner, that was a mere clip. The full version of that interview is due out on GB News Originals. We're just waiting for them to edit and release that. And then after that interview, there should also be one released by Fox News Digital, who also interviewed me over the same story that you're hearing us elaborate for you in this stream today. Fox News Digital should release theirs after GB News Originals have released theirs as well. In the meanwhile, Ayaan Hirsi Ali has also, since writing for Free Press, written an article in the Daily Mail explaining this story as well. It is an incredibly significant story for those interested in actually challenging extremism, terrorism, and hate in our societies, and for those interested in opposing the hard left or the regressive left, as I coined to describe this kind of left-wing behavior, those left-wing activists who are not really actually left-wing. They're not progressives, they're regressives. So it is really a truly consequential story. It was a huge story up until, of course, the incident in the White House Correspondents' Dinner involving Cole Allen and the apparent alleged assassination attempt against senior officials not sure who exactly he was targeting because his manifesto said he was targeting all of them. But it was a huge story until that event happened. But we have no doubt that the story will once again become huge because, of course, the indictment will lead to further investigation and further revelations. So stay tuned for us because Radical Media will be following this story closely. Clearly, I'm personally affected by the story as well. But that's all we got time for today. We thank you all for your time. If you go to Radical Media on majidnawaz.substack.com, you can become premium paying subscribers to Radical Media, which grants you access to the full Radical Dispatch, including its paywalled content and the paywalled podcast version of this stream as well. We thank you for your support. We cannot do this investigative work without your support. And as we hope you can see, it's investigative work and standing on principle that we've been doing for a very long time, as this Southern Poverty Law Center story demonstrates as well. We thank you for your time. You've been listening to The Radical here on the Warrior Creed live stream. I'm Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.